Hello and welcome to the Friday Football Show. I'm Alan Saunders. Welcome to the Beaver County Audio Studios on Pittsburgh Sports Live. We're going to talk football for the next, maybe 15, 20 minutes. We've got a lot to talk about today, so I'm going to get right into the first segment we usually do, which is talk about what I got right and what I got wrong last week, talking about football in Pittsburgh. And, Pitt went down to Central Florida and got lambasted by the UCF Knights, and I pretty much saw that one coming. On the NFL side, though, Steelers struggled on offense against the Baltimore Ravens. Not something I saw happening. We'll get into the Steelers first because I think that merits further discussion. I think the Steelers' offense is sort of at a crossroads right now. We've seen Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown perform at a very high level. We've seen James Conner be a very efficient fill-in, if not the same level of talent as Le'Veon Bell. Seen guys like Jesse James, Vance McDonald, Juju Smith-Schuster all have big games, and all that's happened this season in the first few weeks. So there's no reason to think that they can't put it all together, but man, do they look bad against the Ravens. They've looked bad in the first quarters of games. There's just something that's not clicking with that Steelers offense. And they have the talent to put it together. That's the irreplaceable part. But you have to start to wonder, I saw some speculation on Twitter. Is it how often Ben Roethlisberger practices? Is it the fact that Antonio Brown skipped a good portion of training camp, with a minor injury? How much does that play into whether these guys are on the same page? How much does the offense coming into this season planning on having a Le'Veon Bell and then not having him, having to adjust that game plan on the fly to a different player in James Conner? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. But I don't think it's time to write the Steelers' offense off just yet. They've got talented pieces. Ben Roethlisberger's obviously in the later stage of his career, but he still seems like the kind of player that should be able to, if not be an all-pro caliber quarterback, move this offense down the field, keep them on the field to protect the defense, which is, I think, struggled as everyone expected them to, and make a difference in the game. And they're playing against a team that sort of Jekyll and Hyde a bit themselves, the Atlanta Falcons this week at Heinz Field. And look, Vegas line Steelers favored. I think that's probably not the feeling a lot of Steelers fans have going into this game right now, coming off that loss against Baltimore. They're kind of down on the team, but I think they have the talent to figure it out. Will it be this week? I'm not sure. So I'm not gonna put a big prediction on this game, but I think the Steelers' offense is better than they've shown last week. But at some point you are what you are. They weren't very good in the first week against Cleveland either. So they need to put something together. I think this is the week. I don't see any big fixes for the defense. I think they're going to continue to struggle. Whether it's Artie Burns or whether it's the inside linebackers and the safeties against tight ends and running backs, or whether it's just that defensive line getting pressure with 3 or 4 men or being stout against the run at the point of attack. I don't think they really could feel good about maybe anyone outside of the way Joe Hayden has played this season. Cam Hayward, obviously, a talented player, but hasn't been as productive as he has been in the past. Neither is Stephon Tuitt on that defensive line. I think the Steelers' defense has big problems, but doesn't take an elite defense to win the division and get into the postseason, and that means they have 10 weeks to figure it out and see if they can come up with a solution. But I don't see any quick fixes for that Steelers defense, certainly not right now. Let's move to something that I want to talk about that's a bit off the beaten path for today. We talk about the Steelers a lot. We talk about Pitt a lot because that's the team I cover. And I talk about high schools a little bit. This week, though, an excellent article in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette by Mike White, who's championing the idea of the WPIAL and the PIAA recognizing 8-man football as an alternative to 11-on-11 football. And I know that's something that probably a lot of people aren't familiar with, that people probably never seen. If you're from Western Pennsylvania, you probably never seen 8-man football played. It's a lot more common in other parts of the country. And, it allows teams to survive when they don't have enough players. I mean, we've already seen in this area, Carrick has canceled their season. They're done. They're not playing anymore. Northgate, I think, is playing with 12 players the last time I heard. There's several teams out there playing with, in the 20s number of players, 20, 22, 24, 28, something like that. And then you start to get guys injured. It's not safe. It's not fun. It's not very good football. And so then the options at that point are, do you combine some teams? And that's already happened in the City League to a great extent. They're now down to 5 teams after having 8, 10, 12 back in the 1980s. That's one way to do it. But that means that somewhere, some town loses their team, right? So, I mean, let's say, Avonworth is having a hard time filling its team, and they just lump that together with North Hills. Well, fine, there's a football team, but then there's one fewer community with a game to go to Friday night, one less marching band, one less cheerleading squad, and, all the sort of things that go along with high school football. And I thought Mike made an excellent case. And so I went in and took a look at the numbers to kind of build on that. And I will link to Mike's story in the description here because I think it's an excellent read. But here are the total participants for 11-on-11 football, and this is from the National Federation of High Schools. In the last 5 years, down from nearly 1.1 million to just 1.03 million. So, I mean, there's still obviously a lot of people playing high school football, but the trend is, as you can see, significant downward trend. And they also track the participation for other codes of football, like 8-man football, and I'll go to that one here. You can see that's trending upwards. There's different ways you can. There's 6-man football, there's 8-man football, 9-man football, flag football. You can throw rugby in that mix as a sort of an alternative code of football, but they're up significantly over the last 5 years. Gains of a few thousand, but nearly 10% gain in that realm. Yeah, it's a smaller pool, and certainly if you look here, it's not like it's coming from any one place. But 9-man football, 8-player football seems to be the one that has gained the most traction, with just about 19,000 participants year over year around the country. Look, I think I think that's something that there's no reason not to, right? I mean, what's the downside for the PIAA and WPIAL to say, look, if schools want to do this, let's put this out there as an option. Maybe there'll be participants, maybe there won't, but I don't see there being any downside to the state recognizing that, and I think there's significant upside for those small communities that want to continue to have a football team that maybe don't have the manpower, and they're looking ahead and seeing this trend continuing. They're seeing, the downward trend in participation. They can look at their youth football teams and tell 4, 5, 6 years down the road how many players they can have. And I think there would be a lot of schools in Western Pennsylvania that would look at 8-man football as a realistic option. I think the one thing that maybe people would hold up as downside is, well, if you have a kid that's looking at going to Division I or even Division II or Division III to play college football, are they going to get the same kind of attention as someone that's playing 11-on-11 football? And I would say probably not the same level of attention, but they are going to get attention. And let's not pretend that a game of 11-on-11 football being played by 2 teams with less than 20 players each is anywhere near the same kind of game as what we're seeing, in the high levels of 6A when there's 50-player teams and multiple junior varsity and I mean, that's already a totally different animal. So if a school is going to go to, a small single A, way out in the middle of nowhere town to go recruit a kid who's playing low-level high school 11-on-11 football, I think they would go through the same effort to find someone playing 8-on-8 football. I don't think it really changes that math too much for a player that's being recruited. And, the other thing is, I think, sadly, or maybe just as a fact of reality, a lot of the times when you see there's a town with one really, really good football player that doesn't have a big program or a big team or very, very successful team, more often than not, you're going to see that player end up at some type of charter school, Catholic school, private school, transfer, whatever it is. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I think is probably up for debate, but that's just the way it is. I mean, you're not going to see a Division I player stay at a lot of these very small schools anyway. So I don't think that's really a concern that merits a lot of consideration. So, yeah, I'm going to link to Mike's story in the description here, but check it out because it's definitely worth your time, and he does fantastic stuff covering the WPIAL for the Post-Gazette always. Going to shift gears for the second time here and go to Pitt, where the Panthers are hosting Syracuse at Heinz Field Saturday afternoon start, and I'll be there, of course, for Pittsburgh Sports Now. It's a tough time for Pitt fans. I don't think they feel very good about the team, the coach. To me, I mean, just sort of taking the pulse of the fan base on Twitter, you go on the message boards, it's a very negative place. They're unhappy with the way things have gone this season, and I think maybe more so than the 2-3 record, just sort of the way Pitt has been uncompetitive in its 2 games against high-level opponents in Penn State and Central Florida. And talked with athletic director Heather Lyke yesterday afternoon, and she gave the dreaded vote of confidence to Pat Narduzzi, which generally means absolutely nothing. Although if you want to seriously get through her words and sort of parse things out, it does seem like she was a bit more supportive of Narduzzi now than she was, say, men's basketball coach Kevin Stallings during his season last year. But clearly things are not going well for the Panthers, but I just kind of wanted to put that into some perspective because I feel like people have turned in an extremely negative way on Pat Narduzzi, and, well, things aren't going great right now. I'm not quite sure the evidence bears out the amount of negativity that's going around. I looked up the winning percentage of every Pitt football coach since 1989. I just picked 89 because it's about 30 years. And here you go. It's Narduzzi's middle of the pack, upper middle of the pack, ahead of his 2 predecessors, Graham and Christ, just behind Walt Harris and a good bit behind Dave Wannstedt, but well ahead of Johnny Majors and Paul Hackett in the early 1990s. When it comes to winning percentage, he also has more 8-win seasons than any other coach on a per-season basis that Pitt has had. And look, things are not good right now, but I think that, people calling for Pat Narduzzi to be fired at this point, I just don't see it. I don't see Pitt making that change. One, he's owed a lot of money. He was just signed to a 7-year contract extension. But 2, I don't think it's a particularly realistic look at where the program is and what Pitt could sell a better coach on to get them to walk in the door. I mean, you look at that basketball program, yeah, things were bad for Kevin Stallings last year. But you can also point to very recent, very high-level success under Jamie Dixon and say, look, I mean, Jamie Dixon was not a perfect coach. He certainly had faults. He wasn't a particularly good recruiter while he was at Pitt. He didn't play a particularly enthusiastic style. I think a lot of coaches could come in and say, look, this is what Jamie did. Yeah, okay, I could be that good. Maybe there's some places I could be better if I'm not, there's opportunities there that you could point to and say, you could win at Pitt. Is there that in football? Can you sell a coach on, you could come to Pitt and you could win and it'll advance your career? And then does Pitt really want that? Do they want to go back to the stepping stone higher? Because that's what it would have to be. It would have to be an up-and-coming coach that would look at Pitt as a means to an end, a place where he could continue to develop his career on the way to somewhere else. Pat Narduzzi wants to be at Pitt. He seems to be a good fit personality-wise for the city and the university, and seemingly gets along pretty well with Heather Lyke, although, we've reported there have been disagreements, but seems like it's generally a pretty happy marriage there. I think Pat Narduzzi deserves a chance to turn this season around, certainly, and even if things don't get any better than they were at 5-7 last year, or maybe even a slight step back just because of the difficulty of the schedule this year, I don't see Pitt making any kind of moves. So I think the coaching staff, maybe there'll be some other changes if things continue to go poorly, but I think Pat Narduzzi's the guy for now, and I think that's probably the way it should be. One last thing before we go here on Friday afternoon, a sad note I want to touch on. Duquesne running back Marquis Brown passed away Thursday night. Very sad story. he jumped from a 16th-story window in Duquesne's Broadier Hall Thursday night. This is according to a report from Duquesne president Ken Gormley. He was transported to Mercy Hospital, where he later passed away. It's homecoming weekend for the Dukes, and they are scheduled to play their first conference game against Bryant Saturday afternoon at 1 p.m. Obviously, you know, your heart goes out to the young man's family, his friends. I know there's several DeMatha athletes around the city, 2 on Pitt's football team, that have already sort of expressed their thoughts on social media. Just a tragedy. And you have to feel for specifically, you know, Jerry Schmidt and that Duquesne staff. I'm not sure how you go about preparing your team to play a game 24 hours after getting that kind of news. But, you know, they're all in my thoughts and the rest of us at Pittsburgh Sports Now. We will, of course, be at Rooney Field on Saturday for that game, as we are for all of the Dukes home games. And let's let that segue into our coverage for this weekend. Parker Hurley will be on the bluff for the Dukes and the Bulldogs. That's a 1 p.m. kickoff on Saturday. I'll be at Heinz Field Saturday. Pitt and Syracuse. We got the wrong logo there. Pitt and Syracuse this week at Heinz Field. And then tonight, Steve Brenner, Imani versus Clairton. Big single-A matchup. Should be a ton of fun down in the Mon Valley. Sunday, 1 o'clock. Steelers, Falcons. That's all we got, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching. The Friday Football Show, as all of our shows are here, brought to you by Beaver County Auto. They sponsor our studio and have been a huge help for getting what we have going at Pittsburgh Sports Live off the ground. Also, please feel free to comment and subscribe to the channel right there below. That really helps us out for what we're doing. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.